Baki versus Oliva. This fight is iconic because it isolates raw strength as the sole variable and tests whether technique can exist without it. Biscuit Oliva, known as Mr. Unchained, represents absolute muscular dominance. A man whose power is so overwhelming that institutions adapt around him rather than contain him. Baky deliberately enters Oliva's territory by getting himself imprisoned.
そこへ収監してもらいたい。
アリゾナ州立刑務所といえば。
Turning the fight into a controlled experiment rather than a spontaneous clash. Oliva's fighting style rejects technique entirely. He relies on mass, density, and direct force, absorbing strikes without defense and countering with crushing blows meant to end the fight immediately. Baki initially cannot affect him at all, as conventional attacks simply fail to penetrate Oliva's muscle structure.
まあ、落ち着けよ。
The fight shifts when Baki abandons attempts to overpower and instead focuses on internal damage. Timing strikes to moments when Oliva's own movement creates structural vulnerability. The fight concludes with a direct test of strength, but under altered conditions. Baki forces Oliva to move, destabilizing his base and breaking the illusion of immovability. When Oliva is pushed back far enough to breach the prison itself, the symbolic meaning becomes clear. Strength that exists without adaptability is ultimately constrained. The fight is iconic because it demonstrates that absolute power can still be displaced when precision and intent are applied at exactly the right moment. Yujiro versus Kaku Kaiou. This fight is iconic because it is one of the only times Yuujiro is challenged not by raw physicality, but by refined technique taken to its absolute extreme. Kaku Kaiou enters the arena as a 146-year-old martial artist whose body has been stripped of excess tension through decades of conditioning. His entire philosophy rejects brute force in favor of perfect efficiency, allowing him to neutralize power by flowing with an opponent's movement rather than resisting it. Kaku's core weapon is the ultimate relaxation state, a biomechanical principle where the body remains completely loose until the exact moment force is required. By removing muscular resistance, Kaku eliminates predictable reactions, allowing Yujiro strikes to pass through or be redirected with minimal effort. This is not mystical energy, but physics. Relaxed joints absorb impact, while sudden tension converts borrowed momentum into counterforce. For the first time, Yujiro's overwhelming strength fails to immediately dominate the exchange. If you're enjoying this breakdown, hit subscribe, like the video, share it with someone who still thinks Baki is just punching, and tap hype if it's there so the algorithm stops shadowboxing us. The fight ends when Yuujiro abandons restraint and escalates beyond technique entirely. He overwhelms Kaku by stacking speed, power, and intent simultaneously, forcing the old master's body beyond its physiological limits. In response, Kaku intentionally stops his own heart, using complete physiological control to simulate death and remove himself from the fight on his own terms.
老衰です。
Afterward, he restarts his heart, demonstrating that his mastery extends even to voluntary control over life functions. The fight is iconic because it establishes the ceiling of martial knowledge in the series, and then shows that Yuujiro exists beyond even that ceiling. Hanayama versus Spec. This fight is iconic because it strips combat down to pure endurance and will, abandoning technique almost entirely. Hanayyama represents absolute physical conviction, a fighter who does not dodge, retreat, or optimize movement. Spec, a death row inmate engineered around violence and surprise, enters the fight using weapons, ambush tactics, and overwhelming aggression. From the start, the clash is framed as immovable force versus escalating brutality. Spec relies on sustained defense designed to break the body faster than it can respond. He unloads extended barrages of punches, uses concealed weapons, explosives, and firearms, and repeatedly attacks Hanayyama when the fight should already be over. Hanayyama's response is not counterplay, but absorption. He allows damage to accumulate, remaining upright through gunshots, shattered bones, and internal trauma. His refusal to fall reframes the fight into a test of whether punishment alone can overcome resolve. The turning point comes when Hanayama abandons passivity and commits fully to offense. He closes the distance and delivers single, devastating blows that carry the accumulated intent of the entire fight. Spec's tactics collapse because they rely on the opponent yielding to pain, something Hanayama never does. The fight is iconic because it demonstrates that, in Baky, raw durability and unwavering intent can surpass weapons, preparation, and strategy when pushed to their extreme limits. Katsumi versus Pickle. This fight is iconic because it represents the moment traditional martial arts collide with a physical reality they were never designed to handle. Katsumi Orochi enters the fight as a karate prodigy who has perfected speed, form, and striking efficiency. Pickle, by contrast, operates purely on instinct and prehistoric physiology, possessing muscle density and reaction power that ignore modern combat logic. From the outset, the fight frames technique versus biology in its most extreme form. Katsumi's strategy revolves around compressing time and force into a single decisive strike. By refining his movement and muscle coordination, he unleashes a punch that breaks the sound barrier, maximizing kinetic transfer at the moment of impact. The strike lands successfully, damaging Pickle in a way few opponents ever have. However, the cost is catastrophic. Katsumi's arm cannot withstand the stress generated by the technique, resulting in severe self-inflicted injury. The fight exposes the physical limits of even the most refined human mechanics. The outcome is not decided by dominance, but by consequence. Pickle endures the blow and continues fighting, while Katsumi is forced out by the failure of his own body. The fight is iconic because it establishes a hard boundary in the series. Technique can momentarily bridge impossible gaps, but the human body still pays the price. It is a definitive statement that evolution, not mastery, defines the upper limits of combat in Baky. Jack versus Muhammad Ali Jr. This fight is iconic because it dismantles the romanticized idea of skill without survivability. Muhammad Ali Jr. enters believing speed, footwork, and clean boxing fundamentals are enough to overcome any opponent. Jack Hanma represents the opposite philosophy: relentless forward pressure, abnormal pain tolerance, and a willingness to absorb damage in order to deliver it back with greater force. Ali Jr.'s early success comes from precision. He lands clean combinations, exploits Jack's slower reactions, and demonstrates technical superiority in striking. However, his strategy assumes that damage accumulation will eventually slow Jack down. That assumption proves fatal. Jack continues advancing despite taking repeated blows, closing the distance, and forcing the fight into a range where boxing fundamentals lose their advantage. The turning point occurs when Ali Jr. refuses to concede despite escalating injury. Jack capitalizes on this by increasing pressure, rather than adjusting tactics, overwhelming Ali Jr.'s defensive capacity. The fight ends not because Ali Jr. is outskilled, but because his body cannot endure the damage his pride keeps him exposed to. The fight is iconic because it shows that technique without the ability to survive punishment collapses the moment an opponent refuses to yield. Baki versus Pickle. This fight is iconic because it forces Baki to confront an opponent who exists completely outside modern combat logic. Pickle is not a martial artist, a strategist, or a trained fighter. He is a living apex predator whose body evolved to kill creatures larger and stronger than anything in the present day. Baki enters the fight knowing that technique alone cannot bridge the gap, so his approach shifts toward disruption rather than domination. Baki abandons direct damage and shifts to relentless pressure, refusing to let Pickle rest or reset. He continuously advances, chains movements together, and forces non-stop engagement, outperforming Pickle in speed and adaptability. Instead of overpowering him, Baki controls the pace of the fight, forcing Pickle to react repeatedly rather than rely on his natural instinctive dominance. The defining moment occurs when Pickle responds by adapting, using a martial movement rather than pure instinct.
ピクルが技を
Although Baky does not win decisively, forcing Pickle to evolve marks a symbolic victory. The fight is iconic because it shows that adaptability can pressure even a being built for absolute dominance, proving that intelligence and variation can momentarily rival raw evolutionary superiority. Jack versus Pickle. This fight is iconic because it represents the collision between modern extremity and prehistoric dominance. Jack Hanma enters the fight having rebuilt his body through artificial enhancement, extreme conditioning, and sheer obsession. Pickle, a revived prehistoric human, represents natural physical supremacy untouched by technique or modern limitation. From the opening exchange, the fight establishes that this is not a contest of skill, but a comparison of who can endure and inflict the greater level of biological damage. Jack's strategy is built around overwhelming offense and relentless pressure. He charges head-on, uses grappling, stomps, and biting to force the fight into close quarters where escape is impossible. Pickle responds instinctively, countering with raw strength, bone-crushing grips, and animalistic reaction speed. The most infamous moment occurs when Jack attempts to dominate through a biting exchange, only to lose a massive portion of his face. This moment redefines the stakes by showing that Pickle's physicality exists on a level Jack's modifications cannot fully bridge. Despite a catastrophic injury, Jack refuses to disengage. He continues attacking with a body that should no longer function, redirecting Pickle's charges and striking with whatever force he can still generate. The fight ends with Jack's defeat, but not his collapse. Pickle is visibly unsettled by Jack's refusal to submit, recognizing a form of willpower that even primal strength cannot erase. Baky versus Yuujiro. This fight functions as the narrative core of Baky because it is not structured around winning by force, but around redefining dominance itself. Yuujirou Hanma enters as the uncontested strongest being alive, a fighter who believes power alone determines truth. Baky enters knowing he cannot surpass his father physically, so his approach is built around forcing Yuujiro into situations where raw strength is no longer enough to assert control. The battle abandons standard martial exchanges in favor of environmental and psychological warfare. Yuujiro treats the surroundings as disposable tools, using cars, walls, and even Baky's body to assert superiority. Baky counters by abandoning traditional technique and instead optimizing movement efficiency, timing, and adaptability. His most important breakthrough comes when he replicates the movement principles of a cockroach, reducing wasted motion and generating explosive acceleration. This allows Baky to briefly outpace Yuujiro, marking the first time anyone has forced him to react rather than impose. The fight concludes without a conventional victory because its resolution is ideological. Yuujiro does not fall, but he concedes something far more important: acknowledgement. By accepting Baky as a true equal rather than a failed successor, Yuujiro relinquishes absolute dominance. The fight is iconic because it resolves years of psychological abuse and inherited violence through recognition rather than defeat, permanently altering the power dynamic between father and son.